Hi, my name is Jim Gibson. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about practical applications of cable. And basically this video is going to be for people who do it yourself, or new technicians, or people new to the industry, and maybe some computer people that really don't do cabling on a regular basis, so they need to understand the different categories, different features, and the different applications of these cables. And so again, we're not going to be talking about the math and the science behind the twists in the cable and how many twists they should have per square inch and things like that. We're going to talk about things that are practical, that help you to decide what is the best cable that you could use for your application. Let's get started. There's two types of cable that are popular today, and they're called Category 5e and Category 6. A little bit of history of categories. Sometimes it's shortened to Cat5e, Cat6, things like that. Little history of categories. I remember when they first came out with Category 3, and that was absolute great category to work with, great cable to work with, everything else. But as you move up in time, the technology gets better and better, like it does everywhere else, and the categories move up. So the higher categories are the better for bandwidth. So we're talking about bandwidth categories. We're not talking about anything else. It still uses copper. There's still just 4 pairs in the cables. But the ones that are used today are Category 5e and Category 6. So let's talk a little bit about them. Now this is a 5e cable, and if you notice, it has 4 pairs of wires. And when you're talking about local area network cable, you always talk about pairs, not individual wires. So this, yeah, of course it has 8 wires, but it's always referenced as pairs. And no matter what category you use, it's always going to have 4 pairs of wire. That's the Ethernet standard. That's a standard for local area networks. That's a standard on your jacks. That's a standard on your panel, everything else. It's always going to be 4 pairs. And of course, they're always in pairs. You can't split pairs. You can't use one wire from one pair and another wire from another pair. If you do that, you're going to have crosstalk problems and a lot of issues in your network. So you have to keep them separate, and you have to use them as pairs. So this is Category 5e, and it's thinner than Category 6, as you can see the difference. It's a thinner cable, but not only that, there's a little bit more going on in Category 6. So I always use my cutters here. These have to be the cheapest strippers there is out there, but on top of that, they're the best strippers, and it's really neat. All they have is a razor blade in there and this little handle here that you push down on. I don't know if you can see it, and it also has a very unique punch down tool for 110 punch down, which is pretty much the standard today on computer networks. And let me show you how it works, and then I'll talk to you about 1 or 2 other issues. But you just want to do this end. If you take it and you just spin it once or twice, the coating comes right off like that. So the outside coat comes right off, and we're going to talk about the coats. But you can see the difference in the thickness of these things. I don't know if you can see it from where I'm at in the camera, but you can see the difference in the thickness of these things. Cat5 is thinner. Cat6 is going to be a fatter cable. The reason why is because there's more twists in the cable. And so it's more expensive actually to get a Cat6, and that's one of the reasons why, is because there's more twists in the cable, so it takes more energy to build these cables, more technology, more equipment to build these cables. But not only that, that means there's more copper in these cables. And with more copper, it obviously is going to add to the expense of the cable. And so when you pick up a box of Cat6, you're going to see it's heavier. 1,000 foot box of Cat6, 1,000 foot box of Cat5e. There's going to be a distinct difference. And so when you're ordering these cables from us, you're going to realize that a 5e is going to be less expensive to ship because it doesn't weigh as much as a Cat6. And we're going to talk about application a little later, but right now let's continue on the cable. If you see Cat6, it has this thing on there, it's called a separator. And I know you can't see it, but the separator is twisted also. And the cable goes into this little plastic separator, and it twists around the other ones. So it twists like that around there. So the more twists you have in it, the less crosstalk you're going to have. And the further you go with the cable, you stand a chance to have more and more crosstalk on that cable. So the twists prevent the crosstalk. That's pretty much what you need to know. And Cat6 is a better cable than Cat5e. And Cat5e has less twists. It's a thinner cable. It's a lighter cable. You can almost see it, I hope, in the video, the difference in the twists. Maybe you can see it, maybe not. Don't know. Now the other thing is the shielding. You have two types of shielding, and not shielding, cases, plastic cases that go on the outside. And it's not. You have two types of coatings on these plastics, and you have the same two types of coatings you see on Cat5e as you do on Cat6. Now the difference between the two coatings is this. One is plenum rated, and I don't know in this situation because it's hard to tell just looking at it. It usually just says it right on there on the cable whether it's plenum rated. And then there's others that are non-plenum rated. Sometimes they're called PVC or riser cables or things like that. And it's the makeup of the chemical that made this plastic. This is the plastic I pulled off the cable. It's the makeup of this plastic, and what it is plenum rated cable. When it burns, does not release gas that people feel is harmful to humans. So if a building is burning down, the firemen are running in, and you use plenum rated cable, it protects the firemen from the fumes of the burning cable. Now there's certain applications for these things too. So plenum rated cable is generally in businesses. You're going to find them in commercial buildings, things like that, warehouses, things like that. You're going to find them there. PVC rated is basically for homes. So you're going to find them in the homes, things like that. So there is a difference between the two types of cable coatings. Now plenum rated cable is going to be more expensive than regular PVC cable. So think of it this way, the lowest cost of cable is going to be your Cat5e PVC. Then the next in cost is going to be your Cat5e plenum rated. And then the next one is going to be Category 6 PVC. And then, of course, the most expensive cable out there is going to be Category 6 plenum. But, you know, I've seen installers install PVC cable in commercial buildings and then have the inspector come in and say, no, you pull that cable out, that won't pass inspection. So if you're a cabler, you got to make sure you know the code in your area, and sometimes the code even varies from city to city. In California, I remember that in some cities, you know, even homes had to have plenum rated cable. I don't know why there's no real application for that, but sometimes people really freak out over it. So anyway, make a long story short, there's a different coatings, different things. Now what's the difference between Cat5e and Cat6? The difference between Cat5e and Cat6 is the speed of the cable. You're going to have a faster cable in Cat6. It's going to have more of a bandwidth, as they say. So you're going to push more zeros and ones through it a lot better. It's going to be less of a problem, less crosstalk, things like that. Cat5e is absolutely fine, by the way. When I bought my house, years ago in California, I cabled it with Category 3 cable everywhere. And when I sold it about a year ago, and when I sold that, before I sold that house, my wife could watch TV in one area, family members could watch another TV in another area, and I could watch my TV, you know, somewhere else, and we all could be doing streaming at the same time, and it was not a problem. But now my Category 3 cables were very short, so in that case they were all under 20-30 feet, and so that affects it too. The further you go, you should have you know, Cat6 cable. It's going to help you in that distance. Now there's other types of Cat5 and Cat6 cable that you need to pay attention to. So some people call up and they'll ask me, can I take this normal cable in a box and can I bury it? Well, yes you can. You can do anything you want with it. Is it advised? No, it's not advised. This is called, and I'm sure even some technicians don't know this, this is called IW, inside wire. It's made to go behind the wall. It's not made to be buried in dirt or even in a conduit. I know a lot of people say, well, you know, I ran a conduit from my one building to, you know, the barn, and I'll put this cable in it. Will it work? Yeah, it'll work. But that conduit sometimes ends up with water in it. So what you actually need is what's called direct burial. And even if you had a conduit, I would still put direct burial cable in there. And the reason why is it's made to repel water. And you see all these cables coming out here and everything else? Normally these are all dry cables, and they're not affected by tons of water hanging around them or things like that, because there isn't in a house or in a commercial building. But you go underground and you use direct burial cable, it's going to have a heavier casing, a heavier outside casing, And on top of that, some of the high-end direct burial, or some of the particular direct burial, is going to have a jelly in there. And that jelly is like, you know, we used to call it icky picky, because you'd be dealing with it all day and you'd get it all over your hands, and then, you know, you'd touch your clothes and all the dirt that's on your clothes are on the ground, and you'd end up looking like you have a glove in your hands, and it was called icky picky. But the thing is, if water gets through this shielding, or not, this casing out here, and the icky picky, the glue, it's not actually glue, it's like a thick, really thick Vaseline that's sticky. And but the water can't penetrate it any further. It repels water. So that's the best to use underground, even if you have a conduit, because water gets into conduit all the time. I know, because when I used to install cable, we'd have to get a vacuum cleaner and push the water out the other end, or suck it through, or whatever. But we had to do that. We had to, you know, get the water out of conduit. So conduits underground. Now someone's going to say, you know, Jim, I got some high-end conduit design, you know, with 3-inch conduit that's going into a cement casing in the middle of the parking lot that has a sump pump. Well, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about practical cable, and even if it's in a conduit, is going to deteriorate. The other thing is UV protected, UV rays. I know once a lady asked our company to run some cable at her house, and we said the only way we can do it is on the outside. And this was when I was a young cabler, and we ran the cable on the outside. And about 3 years later, she called me up and said that cable is deteriorating. And we went out, and of course, the casing was just falling apart from the UV rays, from the sun shining on it every day. Some people say, I'm going to do direct burial, then I'm going to run it up the side of a building. What should I do? Well, in that case, a conduit going up the side of the building and into the building. Yeah, that would make sense. I wouldn't run the conduit underground all the way across. I'd use direct burial, go up into PVC piping or something like that. But the other thing would be, why don't you just get direct burial and also get UV protected. So when it's underground, it's direct burial, and when it's above ground, like somebody wanted to run it underground and along their fence, well, it's above ground, it's protected from the UV rays. Anything that's outside is not going to last as long as what's behind your wall. And that's the next thing. Once you cable and everything is working, you know, jacks are all there, and you tested everything and everything's working fine, it's not going to fall apart. I used to give a 15-year warranty on our cabling, and you know, there was no one ever called back and said, this cable isn't working anymore, it's deteriorated, it fell apart, the workmanship is horrible. Never said that. Never had a go back on cabling. So we talked about Cat5e, Cat6, you got my recommendations on that, plenum versus PVC, burial, direct burial, UV, things like that. Let's talk about shielding. Some people will call me up and say, I need shielded cable. Now let me tell you, if you want to order any of this stuff, I'm not here to tell you what you need, okay? You're going to have to figure out what you need, because for me, I don't use shielded cabling on anything. And even when I was doing, we were doing installs, and we did installs all over the country, 6,000 installations outside the state of California. Never used shielded cable for anything. What is shielded cable used for? Well, some people who live next to a radio station, let's say, you got those big tall antennas in the yard next to you, you're probably going to need shielding to help you in that area. You're going across big industrial motors, 400 volt things, yeah, probably be good to have shielded cabling, or else you're going to pick up a lot of energy from those things. Now, definitely if you're with the CIA or the NSA, you should have shielded cabling. It can't be, you know, people can't read the signals coming off the cable as easily. But when you're putting in shielded cable, you got to put it in right. You got to make sure the shielding is actually grounded, and you got to use shielded jacks and shielded patch panels, and all of it has to be grounded. Now you got to have to ground one end, and the grounding works for everything. So you got to ground it. But very few installers know how to put in shielded cabling perfectly. Now I know I'm going to get some pushback on that. The next thing is fiber. We already talked about fiber a little bit. Some people. I have people call me and say their installer wants fiber. How much does fiber cost? It has its application, fiber, but I don't see it at this point going to desktop PCs or to your computer screen. Unless you have those huge screens, you know, that you can see at a football game or something. I don't think you're going to need fiber. Where you use fiber is usually in a commercial setting, and when I used it all the time was, you know, if a company owned the first floor of a 10-story building, and they had offices on the first floor, the 5th floor, and the 10th floor, I had to connect them all together. Now remember, the distance ramifications when it comes to Cat5e and Cat6 cable, all the categories, is going to be 100 meters. So that's, I think, 328 feet, but you can check with Google. I always ran maximum cable 300 feet. Actually, most of the time, most of the installs were under 100 feet. And on average 150 at the most. So when do you need fiber? Well, you need fiber in that situation if it's over 100 meters, and fiber can go a lot further. And so what we would do is we would install fiber on floor 1 between that switch and floor 5. And we did this more than a handful of times, a lot of times. It was not unusual to put in fiber between switches. And that's where you would connect it. You connect it to a switch, you run it from the 1st floor up to the 5th floor, and then from the 5th floor up to the 10th floor. And so that would help you on your issues with the length requirement, where you can't go over 100 meters. Now, I know some people are going to email me and they're going to say, yeah, well, you can put a switch on the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor. Yeah, you can do all that, and you can extend your network that way. Probably not the best way to do it. It's just put a fiber. When you have buildings that stretch out more than 100 meters, don't put cable in the ground, put fiber. Fiber is not affected by water. Fiber is not affected by static electricity. Fiber is just fantastic. Now, I would train my guys on fiber, and it would take them about 2 hours to learn how to terminate fiber. I would have people that come to my office, and they would say, I just finished a year's course with my GI Bill on fiber termination. I don't know how valuable that is. That type of fiber they're talking about is the fiber that AT&T uses and that Sprint uses and things like that for long distance. That's different than the fiber that's used in local area networks. It's a lot more robust, it's a lot different, and it has different applications. So if you're thinking about learning about fiber, because after all it's a cool thing, then think about who's going to hire you to run that fiber, because a lot of those other companies like AT&T and places like that, they already have their standards down, and they're going to be training their people on how to install that. And so it might be kind of hard to get a job in that, but again, I'm sure I'm going to get some discussions on that. Anyway, make a long story short, you don't need fiber in your house. Maybe fiber to the house is fantastic because that gives you nice bandwidth. And remember, the bottleneck is usually with the ISP, Internet Service Provider. It's not locally in a local area network. It's usually in the ISP. I can't think of anything else. Maybe we talk a little bit about patch cords. So people buy patch cords. Now, this is a stupid patch cord. I'm going to be honest with you. Some idiot wasted a lot of time putting a mod plug on the end of solid wire. Most patch cords have stranded wire, not solid. And I know I'm going to get some pushback on calling someone stupid for doing it. There are certain applications that I would recommend doing mod plugs and crimping them down. And the applications would be if you have a bunch of servers in a rack and you want to run wires or cables to them, and at the same time you want to terminate them up in a switch on the top of the rack. Well, then you need particular lengths that are custom made. So in that case, that's a great idea. Make custom made cable, absolutely. The problem, though, is a lot of people want to buy these mod plugs, and they'll buy the cable, and then they'll go and do these things and everything else, and you'll find out that if you don't do it pretty much on a regular basis, it's going to take you an arm and a leg, and time-wise, you're going to be doing this over and over and over again. Where, come on, patch cords aren't that expensive. They're made by machines. They're tested by computers. The patch cord I sell is this one in particular. I hope you can see it. I call it the Flex, and the reason I call it the Flex is because if you get bubble boots, they call, they're really hard to pull out, especially as they get older. And this little tab here gets very hard. But with the Flex, you can pull back the tab. You can pull it out of a switch or a wall, let the tab go back, and then when you pull it amongst other cables or hardware, it's not going to catch that tab. Now, on this thing, it does not have a stress relief, and it does not have a tab protector like the one I just showed you. So on this one, when you pull it out, it's going to pull up that end piece like that. It's going to look like that. And so if you push it back down, you do that one more time, and it flips off. And that's the end of that mod plug. This is protecting that little tab on the end of the mod plug. And it's just a quality built system. So let's take a look, because I've had people call up and wanted 1,000 foot of stranded cable You don't use stranded cable in a network. Okay. Again, the same familiar 4 pairs. Well, in this case, I already said this is a solid cable. I can recognize it. And if you're going to do this, okay, it's going to be a frustrating day if it's your first time. You're going to have mod plugs that are made for solid cable. There are different mod plugs, and they're really hard to tell the difference between solid and stranded. And so if you're going to use stranded cable, you got to have stranded mod plugs. If you're going to use solid, then you're going to need solid cable mod plugs. This does look like someone knew what they were doing, and they built this using a solid mod plug. And the difference is those little blades that are in the mod plug. If you push in the solid, you need something that catches it like this. If you push in stranded, it needs to go through the cable, and it's capable of doing that. And stranded is good to give you the flexibility. If you're constantly, with a patch cord, you're moving it, and you want that flexibility and things like that. And stranded works better. It's less stress on the wire and things like that. There's a lot of use for stranded cable you see all the time. Your 110 plug, most likely a stranded cable in it and everything else, but it's not used in local area networks for running behind the wall. You use solid copper in that case. So I think I covered everything. Again, if you don't mind, please give me a thumbs up. If this has been valuable to you, I really appreciate if you give me a thumbs up. And at the same time, subscribe. There's going to be more of these things. And thank you for watching to the end. I appreciate you. Have a great day.